Long before pyramids pierced the sky, before Rome ruled empires, before the name Babylon even echoed through time, there was something else. A civilization older than memory itself. A people who rose not from chaos, but from something strange, something organized, advanced, and forgotten. We call them the Sumerians, but they never called themselves that. And for centuries, we didn't even know they existed. Their cities crumbled into dust. Their knowledge was scattered into clay tablets, buried deep beneath the sands of what we now call Iraq. But then, one day, someone started to dig, and what they found didn't make sense. Thousands of inscribed tablets, a written language older than the Bible, records of kings, laws, cities, medicine, even the stars. Not just scribbles or myths, but systems, calendars, contracts, trade, mathematics, astronomy, surgery, ritual. It was as if the blueprint of human civilization had been buried, and we just stumbled back upon it by accident. But here's the strangest part. Most people still don't know, still haven't heard their story, still aren't taught this in school, still believe Egypt was the first great civilization, because somehow the Sumerians were erased, not by fire, not by time, but by silence. We speak of lost civilizations like Atlantis or Lemuria, half history, half dream. But Sumer was real. It had names, leaders, wars, poems, and prayers. It had temples, gardens, and laws. And it was all written down, long before most of the world could even write its own name. And yet, it disappeared. Not just from the earth, but from the record. Who were these people who charted the stars before telescopes existed? Who built temples aligned with constellations we didn't discover until millennia later? Who mapped out the planets, and even named some we only found in the last 200 years? They tracked time in ways we still use today, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 degrees in a circle. Their influence is everywhere, but their name is nowhere. Why, wow, was it a mistake, a loss in translation, or something more deliberate? And then there are the myths, stories they told of beings from the skies, of rulers who descended from the heavens, of knowledge granted to them, not earned. Some say it's just metaphor. Others say it's a warning we've ignored for far too long. But let's ask something simple. If they were the first to build cities, the first to write, the first to govern, then why were they not the first name we learn? Why is their story still missing from most history books? What happened to the people who invented civilization? And why is so much of their legacy still buried? This isn't just archaeology, this is memory. And maybe someone didn't want us to remember. So tonight we're going to uncover what was hidden, not just the facts, but the patterns, not just the tablets, but the message behind them. Because sometimes history doesn't disappear on its own. Sometimes it's erased on purpose. And the question is, who did it? And what were they trying to hide? They didn't arrive slowly like most civilizations. They didn't crawl out of caves, build fires, and sharpen tools for centuries. No, they appeared, fully formed, with cities, with language, with mathematics, with temples, agriculture, and law. It was as if someone pressed fast forward on humanity, and Sumer just happened. Historians call them the first civilization. But when you look closer, the story gets strange, because we still don't know where they came from. No clear migration, no gradual evolution of tools or customs, no genetic trail from a known tribe or region. Just one millennia around 5,000 years ago, they were suddenly there, building places like Eridu, Uruk, and Nippur, fully functioning cities with government, trade, and written records. Not huts, not tents, not wandering groups. Cities. The people we call Sumerians had a writing system, cuneiform, that appeared with staggering complexity, not basic symbols, but syllables, grammar, records, contracts, myths. Imagine that. The first time humanity writes something down, it's not a grocery list, it's a library. How? How does that happen without a long learning curve? Their own texts say something strange. They claim they were taught by beings from the sky. They called them Anunnaki. Great ones from the heavens, not just gods in a myth, but described as real presences. Entities that came down, gave laws, showed them agriculture, told them how to build cities and govern people. Now, some say this is just poetic language, a metaphor for stars, for inspiration, for nature. But others ask, what if the Sumerians were recording exactly what they experienced? What if this gift of civilization wasn't metaphorical, but literal? Because something doesn't add up. Why were the Sumerians so far ahead of everyone else? While most of the world still lived in small tribes, they had city-states, priesthoods, advanced trade routes, and social classes. While others marked time by seasons, they mapped the stars, tracked planets, and divided time into 60-second intervals we still use today. It's not just that they were first, it's that they were too advanced to be first. No gradual slope, no learning curve, no trial and error, just knowledge. Complete, delivered, enacted. And for hundreds of years, no one caught up. No neighboring civilization rivaled them. No nearby culture borrowed and improved. There were just the Sumerians, and then everyone else. That raises a disturbing question. Were they really just another human tribe that got lucky? Or were they the inheritors of something much older? Something lost? Something hidden? There are theories, some controversial, some dismissed outright, that the Sumerians weren't the beginning. They were a restart, a second chapter after a forgotten first, a recovery of knowledge, not a creation of it. And when we read their records, not just their myths, but their administrative texts, their star maps, their rituals, it feels less like the dawn of civilization and more like its return. So where did they come from? Why did they appear so suddenly with systems most civilizations take thousands of years to develop? And why did they say they were taught by beings from beyond? Not worshipped, not imagined, taught. If they were the blueprint for all human society, who was their blueprint? This question doesn't go away as we dig deeper. It only grows louder, because the more we uncover about the Sumerians, the more it feels like they weren't just inventing the future, they were remembering something from the past. And maybe, just maybe, what we call the beginning was never really the beginning at all. When you think of the oldest things humans ever did, writing, law, timekeeping, city building, you might picture ancient Greece, or maybe Egypt. But the truth, the blueprint for all of it, was written by the Sumerians. Long before Rome, long before Babylon, even before the pyramids were built, the Sumerians had already done what no one else had. They invented writing, not a few symbols carved in stone, not just names or tallies, but actual written language. Cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, telling stories, laws, prayers, receipts, treaties, even jokes. Thousands of these tablets have survived, not because they were sacred, but because they were ordinary. This was everyday writing, and that's what makes it so shocking. Because when most of the world was still passing stories by word of mouth, the Sumerians were documenting the structure of their world in permanent record. And with writing came something even more powerful: law. Long before Hammurabi, the Sumerians had codes of justice, rules that govern contracts, punishments, and social rights. A society run not by the whim of rulers, but by written law. Imagine that. An ancient people who believed words on clay could hold more power than swords in hand. But they weren't just masters of earth. They looked up too, way up. The Sumerians charted the sky with precision that still puzzles modern astronomers. They didn't just stargaze. They mapped constellations, named planets, tracked their motion, divided the heavens into 12 zones, the origins of the zodiac. They believed the skies held messages. Not in fantasy, but in patterns. Their knowledge of astronomy was detailed enough to mark eclipses and seasons, and they used it to plant, to harvest, to rule. Even our modern clocks still whisper their legacy. Why is an hour 60 minutes? Why is a circle 360 degrees? Because the Sumerians chose base 60 as their counting system. We didn't invent it, we inherited it. Even today, when you glance at your watch, you're using math shaped 5,000 years ago. It gets deeper. The Sumerians turned wild land into engineered civilization. They didn't just grow crops, they tamed rivers. With complex irrigation canals, flood control, and large-scale agriculture, they made the desert bloom. They created food surpluses, which allowed cities to grow. Not just huts clustered around a well, but organized city-states, with massive temples called ziggurats, with bureaucracies, with class systems, with trade networks stretching for hundreds of miles. Each city had its own king, its own boss, its own laws, and at the center of it all, priests, because in Sumer, power wasn't just political, it was cosmic. The king wasn't just a ruler, he was chosen, connected to the divine order. It was a civilization rooted in order, precision, and structure, both earthly and cosmic. But here's the strange part. All of this came out of nowhere. One moment, humanity was scattered in villages. The next, Sumer was carving its code into clay. And to this day, historians can't fully explain it. How did a desert land, with no resources, no prior example to follow, suddenly give birth to the framework of modern life? How did a people, whose origins remain unclear, create systems so advanced that we still use them today? This wasn't evolution. It was revolution. And it left a trail, one we still follow. Every time we check the time, write a law, sign a contract, or look up at the night sky. The Sumerians were first, but it's almost as if they remembered something the rest of the world had forgotten. Because what they left behind wasn't just invention, it was a foundation, and what happens next in their story will only deepen the mystery. The cities of Sumer weren't just places where people lived. They were spiritual machines designed to bridge heaven and earth, and at the center of each one stood something truly strange, a ziggurat. Massive step towers made of mud brick, rising above the flat plains like staircases to the stars. They weren't palaces, they weren't tombs, they were temples, built for the ones, but not for the people to enter. These temples were meant only for the gods to descend. Each ziggurat was aligned with astronomical precision, to planets, to stars, to the cycles of the heavens. The high priest believed these alignments allowed messages to travel between dimensions. They believed these towers weren't just symbolic. They were functional, like antennas, tuned to the divine. And inside, rituals were held, but not ordinary rituals. These weren't festivals or public prayers. They were secret, conducted by priests trained for years, men who memorized thousands of lines from sacred texts and dreamt in symbols and numbers. They spoke of something called the Me, divine decrees or laws of creation written on tablets. These weren't laws like don't steal or don't lie. They were cosmic codes, instructions for how reality works. They governed life, death, emotions, kingship, fertility, war, even language itself. Whoever controlled the Me controlled the world. And the rituals, they were the method. The Sumerians used sound as more than music. They believed vibration could open the heavens, chanting in precise tones and rhythms, whispers that could shape reality. They used water not just to purify, but as a mirror, reflecting hidden truths, flowing through sacred canals that mimic the rivers of the underworld. They looked to the stars not just for direction, but for knowledge, believing the gods moved through constellations like words across a page. And they encoded all this in symbols and myths. But what if it was more than myth? What if their rituals were ancient technologies? Because here's what scholars still can't explain. How did people over 5,000 years ago, with no modern tools, create temples aligned to stars they supposedly couldn't see? How did they calculate planetary orbits with such accuracy that modern astronomers were stunned by their maps? And how did they understand that sound, just vibration in the air, could affect the mind, the body, and maybe even the world around them? Were they just mystics, or were they preserving something older? A memory of a time when humans still knew how to tune reality. Some believe their rituals weren't just religious. They were experiments, designed to unlock consciousness, to affect time, to influence thought and memory itself. Think about it. When you step inside an ancient temple, even today, You feel something, a stillness, a weight, a presence. That's not an accident. It's geometry. It's acoustics. It's something deeper, something the Sumerians seem to understand. And here's where it gets stranger. Some Sumerian texts describe moments where time bends, where priests would enter the temple and emerge claiming they had been gone for minutes, only to find that days had passed. Others would experience visions that felt more real than the waking world. Were these hallucinations, or were they glimpses into a deeper layer of reality? Modern science tells us that time is relative, that our perception can be altered by sound, light, space, and memory. The Sumerians knew none of this science, yet they designed structures and rituals that align perfectly with these ideas. So who taught them? Where did this knowledge come from? And what happened to it? Because the ziggurats are ruined now, the sacred tablets scattered, the rituals silenced. But the echoes, they still hum beneath the surface. And the deeper we dig into the clay, the myth, the forgotten songs, the more it feels like these ancient temples weren't just made of stone, they were made of knowledge, and that knowledge might still be waiting to be unlocked. In the oldest tablets ever discovered, there's a name that keeps returning, an ancient word whispered across cracked stone and lost languages. Anunnaki, translated roughly as those who came down. But who were they? To the Sumerians, these weren't fairy tales or bedtime stories. They didn't draw the Anunnaki with wings or halos. They spoke of them like rulers, advisors, beings of immense power, but not divine in the way we think of gods today. They didn't create the universe. They didn't ask for worship. They descended, and they taught. That's what's strange. The Sumerians said the Anunnaki gave humans writing. Not invented it, gave it. They said these beings handed down laws, showed how to plant crops, organize cities, measure the stars. They didn't just visit, they shaped civilization. Why would a culture invent that? Why claim their knowledge came from visitors rather than from their own ancestors? Now, some scholars say it's all symbolic, that the Anunnaki were metaphors for forces of nature, archetypes of order and chaos, that the Sumerians used myth to explain what they didn't yet understand. But here's the problem. The same stories appear again. In Babylon, in Assyria, even in distant cultures that supposedly never met the Sumerians. Stories of beings that descend, teach, and leave. Egypt spoke of Thoth, a being who gave language and wisdom. India tells of celestial visitors with flying crafts. Mesoamerican texts speak of gods who taught humans astronomy and law, and then vanished. And always the pattern is the same. Knowledge doesn't evolve slowly, it arrives, suddenly, in a single generation. Too fast, too advanced for what should have been possible. So we return to the Anunnaki. The Sumerians said they lived in the sky, but not the heavens. They described Abzu, the deep abyss, and Duku, the holy mound where the Anunnaki convened. Some believe this language isn't religious, it's geographic, or even technological. What if those who came down was literal? Some theorists go further, claiming the Anunnaki were not gods or metaphors, but a memory of a people who came before history. Maybe they weren't aliens. Maybe they were just older. A civilization erased by time, remembered only in fragments, turned into myth because that's all the language could do to preserve them. Others say the Anunnaki were elite humans, rulers who disguised their power in symbols, who used knowledge as control, writing myths about themselves to stay remembered forever. But there's something even deeper. In the myths, the Anunnaki don't always agree. They argue. They break laws. Some rebel. One story even says they mixed with humans and were punished for it. This isn't how people usually speak about gods. It sounds more like a family or a council or a ruling class. So we're left with questions. Why did the Sumerians describe the Anunnaki with such specificity, giving names, roles, actions? Why did later cultures borrow these beings, reshaping them into their own pantheons? And most of all, why did this knowledge disappear? When Babylon rose, the Anunnaki were still mentioned, but not as clearly. By the time of Greece and Rome, they were gone. It's as if someone edited history, scrubbed the stories clean, turned figures into symbols, then turned symbols into nothing. Today, archaeologists call it mythology. But if the Anunnaki were just metaphors, why do they still feel so real? Because in the end, the power of the Anunnaki isn't just in what they were, it's in what they left behind. A blueprint, a question mark, a shadow on the timeline of humanity, hinting at something we're not supposed to remember, something ancient, something forbidden, something that maybe once walked beside us and vanished. For a civilization that gave the world writing, law, astronomy, the Sumerians should have been remembered forever. But instead, they vanished. Not just their cities, their very name was lost for over 2,000 years. How does that happen? Imagine discovering electricity only to have your name removed from every history book. Imagine building the first cities only to be erased like a bad memory. This wasn't an accident. When Babylon rose to power, they didn't just build on Sumerian land. They took the credit. They copied the stories. They rewrote the poems. Enlil became Marduk, Sumer became Babylon, and the tablets that once told the truth were buried, sometimes literally sealed in abandoned ruins deep beneath sand and ash. Then came Assyria, then Persia. Each empire built higher, but spoke less about the ones below. By the time of the Greeks and Romans, the Sumerians were nothing more than shadows. And for centuries after that, silence. No mention in schools, no discussion in universities. Even in the age of archaeology, the Sumerians were barely a footnote. It wasn't until the 19th century, when European explorers dug deep into Mesopotamian soil, that something strange began to emerge. Thousands of broken tablets, covered in wedge-shaped marks, a language no one could read, a story no one expected. And yet, there it was, Sumer, older than Egypt, older than the Bible, older than anything we'd ever known. So the question is, why were they forgotten? How could the world erase the very beginning of history? Some say it was just time, that centuries of war, flood, and shifting sands buried their memory. But if that's true, why were their stories still copied by Babylon? Why were their tablets deliberately hidden, not destroyed? Why did later empires rename their gods, but keep their powers? It's almost as if someone wanted to use their knowledge, but didn't want the world to know where it came from. And even today, most people don't know the word Sumerian. School textbooks still focus on Egypt, Greece, and Rome. TV documentaries barely touch the subject. Why? Some believe the answer lies not in what the Sumerians built, but in what they knew. Their understanding of astronomy, their math systems based on 60, their precise calendar, their myths of beings who came down from above, the Anunnaki, and their belief that civilization wasn't invented, but given. That's dangerous knowledge, because if the Sumerians were right, then history isn't a straight line. It's a cycle, one that rises and falls, remembers and forgets. And maybe that's why they were erased, because some knowledge, once remembered, would change everything. So they buried it, deep under new cities, under rewritten myths, under systems that feared the truth. But the tablets still speak. Their wedge-shaped marks still whisper. And though the world tried to forget them, the Sumerians are rising again, not in temples or cities, but in questions. Who were they really? And what else did they leave behind that we're still not supposed to know? They were supposed to be forgotten, dust beneath empires, whispers in ruined stone. But the Sumerians never truly died. In museum basements around the world, thousands of clay tablets sit in silence, untranslated, uncatalogued, unseen, each one written in cuneiform, the ancient wedge-shaped script of Sumer. And every tablet holds a voice from 6,000 years ago, a voice that hasn't been heard in millennia. Why haven't they been translated? Is it just a matter of time or something else? Some researchers believe these texts might hold answers we're not ready for. Clues about ancient technologies, descriptions of rituals, records of knowledge we've only recently begun to understand again. What if some of this knowledge is being quietly studied, in silence? What if behind closed doors, in institutions, in think tanks, in classified archives. Someone is already reading them. And what if they don't want the rest of us to know? Because the Sumerians weren't just stargazers and farmers. They thought in ways we still can't explain. Their concept of time wasn't linear. It moved in cycles. They didn't just track planets. They mapped frequencies. Their laws didn't just govern people. They mirrored the structure of the cosmos. And what's more, they believed they inherited this knowledge, that they were not the beginning, but the continuation, a final spark from a fire much older. Maybe that's the real reason they were erased, because they remembered something we're meant to forget. Think about it. Our modern systems still echo their ancient ways. The way we measure time, 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, comes from them. The way we divide circles, the roots of astronomy, the basics of algebra, all trace back to Sumer. But no one tells us this. It's like the truth is hiding in plain sight. We live in a world built on Sumerian bones, yet we act like we built it ourselves. Even our myths aren't really ours. The Great Flood, the forbidden knowledge, the sky gods descending to earth, we hear them in many cultures. But they were first written in Sumer, thousands of years before those stories appeared elsewhere. So who were the Sumerians really? Brilliant inventors? Secret inheritors? Or maybe the last witnesses of something the world isn't ready to face? The idea haunts scholars and seekers alike. Some say the Sumerians were the first to climb out of darkness. Others believe they were the last to remember the light. Because when a civilization leaves behind that much knowledge and still disappears from memory, it tells you something. It tells you they were erased on purpose. But their legacy refuses to die. Their words survive in clay. Their ideas ripple through time. And the deeper we dig, literally and metaphorically, the louder their voice becomes. They are no longer a forgotten people. They are a question. One the world is still too afraid to answer. So the story continues, not just in books, but in minds, not just in museums, but in us. And as long as we keep asking, keep wondering, keep listening, the Sumerians will never be truly gone. What if we were never meant to know? Not because the knowledge was lost, but because someone decided we should forget it. The story of the Sumerians is not just about bricks, clay tablets, or forgotten kings. It's about memory, about how truth can be born, and how easily it can be buried. They say history moves forward, but does it? Or does it move in circles, with pieces of our past intentionally erased to protect a version of the world we're told is real? What if the first civilization wasn't the beginning, but the end of something far older? What if they left us clues not just to remember them, but to remember ourselves? The Sumerians may be gone, but their whispers are still here, in the stars, in our language, in the questions we're finally brave enough to ask. So if this story stirred something in you, keep going, keep questioning, because some stories weren't lost. They were hidden, and now we're starting to remember. If you made it this far, you're the kind of person who seeks truth, not just facts. So go ahead, like this video, subscribe for more untold history, and let me know in the comments, what else do you think they didn't want us to know? The journey's just beginning, and the past is waiting.